surpasses
Patch 3.4.4.
some.
Patch 3.4.3.
Stellaris Developer Diary 258 is out, and now we're getting the patch notes for 3.4.4. This means that 3.4.3 is going the way of the dodo, and we're going to be having quite a few changes coming into Stellaris. Stick around as we go through the extensive notes to find out which changes are coming to the game next week. First thing you're going to notice here is we're getting some massive quality of life improvements with this patch. What am I talking about? Well, the automated exploration and automated research are now available from the start of the game rather than being locked behind a technology. Yes, you're no longer having not a paywall but a tech wall behind these auto explore and auto research buttons, which are going to make the game much easier and much more convenient to play for certain players. I know personally I like queuing up the explore actions myself, but having it automated like this is going to help out a lot of people, so thank you very much to the devs. The next thing we're getting is that construction ships now have an automated construction mode, which will automatically build research and mining stations over appropriate deposits. It will not automatically build observation stations, hyper relays, or any other constructions. These are just the research and mining stations for some juicy minerals, energy, or any research points. This is something we used to have when we had sectors a long time ago. I think it might be patch 2 point something. I want to say, I'm not entirely sure, but a long time ago sectors would have their own construction ships and they would automate construction that way. Now we're going to be getting a button, and that's going to really help in the mid to late game when you conquer or create a lot of new territory and don't want to have to go through every single system, right clicking and then clicking the build all button for each of the research stations or mining stations. So just these two changes here alone I think are absolutely monumental, and they're going to really help from a quality of life perspective, and so I take my hats off to the devs for these. The Imperial Fiefdom origin is getting a few changes. Now, the Imperial Fiefdom Overlord is now barred from terms that allow it to join offensive wars of their subjects. That's going to stop you cheesing and getting the Imperial Fief Overlord to do all of your fighting for you. Every member of the Empire that does not start with the Overlord nearby will start with a small Overlord colony or outpost in the vicinity. The Overlord's Empire will then be connected with derelict gateways that the Overlord can use, but which will become ruined once the Civil War starts. That should definitely help the Overlord with military defense, as they now might find themselves a little bit scattered with their colonies and outposts, but they shouldn't have any logistical issues. Finally, they've changed it so that players can remain loyal to the Overlord when the Civil War begins, if they so wish. However, the AI will always go independent. Whilst these changes do somewhat nerf Imperial Fiefdom, it is still dramatically powerful. There are many ways that you can basically cheese the AI Overlord to get massive bonuses. These have been covered by some other content creators. I've done some bits and pieces which some have now been patched, but yes, Overlord is still one of the most powerful origins in the game, but it isn't quite as powerful as it was at the beginning of 3.4.3. And if you're enjoying this video, please make some changes to that like button. Habitats are getting a new designation. They're getting the Hydroponics Station designation. This will remove 2 housing from habitation districts in exchange for adding 1 farmer job. I'm not entirely sure what the point of this is, but maybe some people have been struggling with food and farming on habitats. If they have, let me know in the comments, because that just sounds a little weird. You can buy it from the market, or you can get extra food with the Starbase building, the hydroponics bay on a Starbase. So interesting that they've chosen to add this. Planetary Automation will now seek to clear blockers as soon as there is any need. It now uses the same formula as the indicator on the outliner. It is limiting the number of districts, or if there are buildings that could be built by clearing the blockers, or if the planet's speed is being reduced, the growth speed. Previous behavior was only to check the first of these, and that is quite important. A lot of the time you actually clear blockers because you want to improve the growth speed of the pops on that planet, because you can get to a sweet spot of logistical pop growth by improving the carrying capacity of a planet, and you can improve the carrying capacity most effectively by removing tile blockers. They've also made some clarifications to the Shroud Walkers, so it's clearer what asset you are getting from them and how the planet modifier works when you're getting the Teachers of the Shroud, I believe. Criminal pops no longer reduce the efficiency of criminal syndicate branch officers. Quantum catapult event art image has been added. They've also added hyper relay event art image, and I didn't know we didn't have these, but it's great if we didn't have them to now get them in finally. The Overlord music track will now play in the main menu. That's pretty cool, but to be honest, neither here nor there. The tooltip now mentions that setting up vassal resource sharing will prevent the affected resources from being traded in regular trade deals later. That's quite a nice little quality of life change, I think, for newer players or for any player that hasn't set up a vassal. It can be a little confusing and a bit incongruous when you set up a deal where they or you are paying a subsidy or a tribute, and suddenly you go to make a trade and you can't trade those resources anymore. Now that it's spelled out to you, I think that's definitely a plus point here. Empires created by releasing sectors or from status quo peace deals now have some starting resources, and this means they will not immediately start suffering from deficits, which obviously was a little bit of an issue for those empires, but can be quite useful for you as an overlord if you want to keep them in line. They've clarified that subjugation war terms only apply to vassals and subsidiaries. The tooltips for resource contribution terms now inform you that they block trade deals for the resources involved. The Reemployment Center holding now shows when the next zombie will be created, whereas previously I think that was missing, so this one I would say is more of a bug fix, but fair enough, if it's an improvement, good for them. Spawning pools and progenitor nests are now under the pop assembly building category, which should make it much easier to find them. They've added subjugation agreement caps of plus 1,000 and minus 10,000. Interesting that they needed to go all the way to minus 10,000. That would make me think they've done some reworking of the subjugation agreement modifiers and limits. They've refined the Teachers of the Shroud requirements tooltip and clarified that progenitor hives can only release sectors if they do not have the Devouring Swarm civic, because it wouldn't make any sense for a Devouring Swarm progenitor hive to release offshoots of itself that it then goes out and eats. I mean, maybe there's some sort of twisted logic there, but I suppose they didn't want to have that happening in the game. Players will now be notified when their overlord has built holdings on their planet. This, I think, is a very good improvement, because until now you had to go into each of your planets and manually look, or go into the agreement screen to see if your overlord actually had holdings. You didn't get a notification when they started building something, and as holdings can dramatically change what happens from an economic perspective on your planets, that could have a massive impact on your empire, and you could be wondering, why on earth am I suddenly in a deficit for energy or minerals or any resource when they built the specific holding building that kind of hoovers up some of those resources from you. The Starbase Transit Hub now also fills the necessary requirement for slaves or non-sapient robots to automatically migrate from planets in the system, whereas previously you had to have the the slave management building that gives you plus 5% slave output and minus 25% political power. Now that you don't need that and you can actually just use the transit hubs, I think that's pretty good. It didn't really make much sense to me that there were different cycles of buildings you had to build, whether or not the pop was free or enslaved. That just sounds like extra steps for the slaving empire, and they should really be making some of these slaving things slightly more economic, because that's the point of having some slave-based or authoritarian-based empires. It is an economic perspective. Partly, of course, maybe some of them are just evil people, or evil aliens, but that's a separate point. The dividend event now specifies which enclave is paying its dues. AI logic for voting on free migration has been adjusted to more strictly align with xenophile or xenophobe ethics. And that does make a lot of sense. At the moment, basically, if you're in a certain Federation type, no matter the ethics of the AI, they will generally be proposing for free migration or proposing to ban free migration, depending on the Federation type more so than the actual ethics of the individual empires. This is a great thematic change, and I'm very glad to see it. They've also given us another great quality of life improvement, and that is that the AI's 10-year voting cooldown has been extended to now apply to other diplomatic actions like declaring war. So now, as of Overlord, they've implemented for federations, the AI will have a cooldown every 10 years. They can't repropose an agenda or a federation law change like having free movement of pops, the free migration treaties, but now they're also going to include things like declaring wars. So we don't have AI constantly spamming the player saying, can we declare war? Can we declare war? Can we declare war? Hey, can we declare war? Now that won't be the case, thank goodness, because it can be mightily annoying. They've clarified the tooltip for the strip mine decision. They've added a setting to Galaxy Setup that permits the disabling of L gates. That's quite cool because actually until now you couldn't really disable L gates, you could just reduce the frequency of gateways appearing in the galaxy, which I believe reduced the frequency of L gates but didn't specifically block them from turning up. Now that you can turn them on and off, that's quite cool from some players that may or may not actually want to play with L gates. I know I've had runs that were kind of ruined by the L gates being opened at the wrong time, and it would be nice to be able to choose early on if I can turn that on and off. Planetary Automation will now build preemptively if there are 0 jobs available on a planet, or if there is an unemployed pop that can work a job from the suggested building. This should solve both the case where we shouldn't make a specialist job for slaves, but also allows us to preemptively build more jobs to allow for auto-migration. That's quite a nice little change right there. They've added an upgrade module to the Planetary Automation such that players can now enable or disable automatically upgrading buildings on their planets. Again, this is a lot of great quality of life improvements that have, I think, really built on some of the changes we've seen, and now that we've had the Stellaris Overlord or the 3.4 Cepheus patch. Automation has had a big change. I am actually going to be delivering to you guys a video on the changes to automation and how you can use them now if you want to stop microing yourself. That video is going to come soon, so keep your eyes looking out for that. But it's great to see they're still adding things to this new automation system. If you're enjoying this video and the other videos on this channel, you can help to support the channel by either becoming a channel member, clicking the join button down below, or becoming a channel Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description. You can also use the super thanks to directly support the channel as well. Or finally, you could purchase something from the Humble Bundle store using the link down in the description below. There are also a lot of balance changes. So, ships will now gain 5 experience per day in battle instead of 1. I think this is, to be honest, quite a minor change. The way that experience works, at the levels of 100, 1000 or 10,000, you get different bonuses. It's basically impossible to get to that max level of 10,000 experience, as in previous editions it would require 10,000 days of fighting in battle. Now it requires only, and I'm saying that in inverted air quotes, 2,000 days of continuous battle, and the ship must survive for that long to get to the max level of experience, which basically means we're still not going to see it. I think the experience system for ships both needs a bit of a rework, and it needs some better explanation for players, because it's very hard to know that it is even a system in the game. They've doubled the base Unity output of telepaths. I don't really think telepaths need more Unity, but fair enough. Thanks. That's nice for them. It's another improvement here to the Psionic Ascension, especially to the teachers of the Shroud Origin. I think this further cements the position of that Origin as well into the S tier. Unified effects for the Citadel of Faith, auto-creating vault, and equivalent buildings. That's where the sentence ends here. I'm possibly thinking they're missing something out, or I'm not understanding the inflection. Maybe they've given more Unity or Unified related effects for these buildings. I think that's what they're saying here, but to be honest, it is slightly unclear to me, so I hope there is a clarification. The Shroud Walkers have learned their lesson, and will no longer teach any Fanatic Purifiers about the Shroud. The Fanatic Purifiers will now have to look for another origin from day one. That is pretty good. I'm definitely happy with that change. The Bulwark Battlerite aura now produces 0.25% hull regen per day. That is a downgrade from the previous. The Bulwark Watch Network effect no longer spawns lots of extra armies, instead it increases planetary stability by 5. Now I actually think that is a better bonus, the +5 stability, because it is an economic one. As you see, all you'd need to do to knock out the Bulwark Watch effect is simply take a specific system during a war, knock out a planet from the Hyper Relay Network, and thus they'd lose their additional armies, making it a very difficult perk to actually have a positive effect from in the game. +5 stability is basically 3% extra resource output, and very nice to boot. Being an overlord now imparts a -1000 penalty to diplomatic requests to be subjugated. This is going to make it much more difficult to subjugate the entire galaxy through diplomacy. I suspect we can still overcome this -1000 penalty to diplomatic requests by getting some other big modifiers, but we'll just have to see if they've made changes to the other modifiers in the game. If they have, it could be we can no longer conquer the galaxy through diplomacy or kind of renegotiate with the galaxy to make sure they know that we are their overlord by the year 50. The Ministry of Science and Vigil Command now have an Empire limit of 1, yet those were massively powerful holdings, and I'm glad they've been nerfed into the floor in terms of the Empire limits for them. It was a bit ridiculous how many you could build. I think Vigil Command does need to be buffed a little bit, possibly to go to something like +3 or +4 to the number of defense platforms you get, but I still think it's very good. The upkeep of the Overlord Beholder jobs now scale with the tier of the Bulwark subject, and thus the increase in defensive platform cap. Okay, so straight away, they've done exactly what I've said they should do in the previous point here, and they're going to be improving the Vigil Command building. So hats off straight away, that is pretty sensible, and it seems like they know what they're doing. The Ministry of Science holding has been reworked. It no longer provides increased research speed for the Overlord depending on the number of science ships in orbit of the subject planet. That was a quite confusing mechanic. You had to put 3 science ships, manned or unmanned, I would recommend unmanned, in orbit to get a maximum of +12% research speed, and you could stack that on every single vassal, leading to some crazy bonuses. Instead, it now gives subject researchers or calculators or brain drones research output for the Overlord instead, with an appropriate increase in upkeep. Basically, what I'm pretty sure this means is that it's like all of the other buildings, we're basically going to be stealing some output from the subject empire. Putting this on a planetary capital with lots of research is going to be really, really powerful, and I look forward to using it. The Orbital Assembly Complex now increases the effects of modules built on the planet's orbital ring. This is a really funny change. Habitation modules will provide +0.5 building slots, shipyards provide +1 capacity, shipyard capacity that is, orbital anchorages provide another +2 naval capacity, planetary defense guns and batteries will support +1 defensive platforms. The Orbital Assembly Complex is a holding building, meaning we're now going to be getting some crazy synergy possible between an Overlord and a vassal by allowing you to upgrade the Overlord's orbital rings. I think this is going to have a massive effect in multiplayer, but otherwise, for single player, it might not be that useful. They have halved the hull and armor regen provided by regenerative hull tissue, nanite repair swarms, nanobot cloud, mercenaries, and devouring swarm. This will also affect the regeneration of leviathans and other entities that make use of these ship components. Yes, because for too long, leviathans have had some, or I say too long, since 3.4, leviathans have had some insane regeneration capabilities that have made it even harder than usual to actually kill the buggers. Now, however, we should have more of a fighting chance. That being said, I don't actually think the bonuses to regeneration here for these components is actually too overpowered. Regeneration will only kick in once you're no longer in combat. Yes, if you get out of combat then get back into combat whilst damaged, you will keep regenerating through the combat, but being able to actually micro that is such a niche and ineffective way to fight that I don't think it's really possible to do in any proper or effective way at all. That then means that you only get the bonuses here after the combat is over, and I think actually why not make regenerative hull tissue or these repair systems work in such a way that you will never need to go back to a shipyard because you just need to wait 100 or 200 days for the fleet to be fully repaired. That does seem pretty reasonable given that the fleet will still be dying in combat and you are losing out. There is an opportunity cost to actually having these hull and armor regen modules on your ship. You don't get to have combat modules that increase the weapons damage, for instance, or not the weapons damage specifically, but increasing the accuracy, thus giving more overall damage, or modules like the shield capacitor, which increases your shield hit points, or alternatively things like the booster, the reactor booster that improves your evasion, thus reducing your incoming damage. By taking hull or armor regen modules, we can't use those. So I kind of think it was fair enough. I still don't think this nerf actually means they're not viable. I still think they are quite viable now in the game as opposed to previous editions, but I am kind of sad to see them get a slap in the face. Retrofitting ships, this is a very interesting one actually here, so you'll want to pay attention. Retrofitting ships will no longer pay out the resources left over after the retrofit costs have been applied. What does that mean? Well, that basically means that this exploit video that I did is no longer viable in any way, shape or form. Basically, you'll no longer be able to retrofit your corvettes at the start of the game to get free alloys out of them. You'll have to either keep them around. I think that's actually going to improve the early game. There'll be a lot more fun things happening because players will have to choose whether to keep their corvettes or get rid of them. And if they keep them, they can use them to be a bit of a nuisance to other empires. Effects that granted modifiers to ship upgrade costs have been replaced with other modifiers. It should no longer be possible to be in a situation where it is cheaper to build empty ships and then upgrade them than to build them correctly right away. That means both parts of the video that I've just shown, that exploit that I showed off a month or two ago, are completely gone, and I'm very happy about that. Being able to get free alloys or being able to build empty ships and then upgrade them into a full ship for cheaper than just building the full ship straight away seem completely bonkers to me, so I'm glad a change has been made here. They have significantly reduced the amount of time it takes to build ion cannons, they've reduced the base cost and upkeep of ion cannons, but they are now affected by components. This is a really powerful and really important change actually, because for too long, ion cannons basically take 3 years to build in game, which is an insane amount of time, given you just get a single Titan weapon, and their upkeep was astronomical. It was like 8 energy for a single ion cannon platform. Now that it's getting reduced, now we're getting reductions to that upkeep cost and build time, I'm actually very happy. That will improve the viability of static defenses, which we are looking to see. I still haven't finished my video on the testing, so you are still going to be getting a defense platform testing video coming out very soon, I promise. Patent pending on the word soon there, because I do have a holiday coming up in the summer, but you will get that soon, and ion cannons do feature in that, interestingly. They have reduced the weighting for clerks, as Pop seemed to really want to work as clerks instead of miners. Yeah, that was a little silly. Mercenary dividends no longer give ships when the patron is near to or above their naval capacity. They've also moved bonus resource storage for silos from tech global production strategy to tech construction templates. That means the construction template technology will give you a bonus plus 5,000 resources. I'm pretty sure it's plus 5,000 resource storage capacity from your silos, both the land-based silos and the starbase-based silos. Now silos are much better in terms of the resource storage they provide. The base provision is 5,000, and I believe it goes up to 10,000, which is a massive number compared to the previous 2,000 we used to have pre-patch 3.4. If you declare a force ideology war on an empire, all, and this is all, non-Gestalt overlords and subjects that are called into the war will also be subject to the force ideology effect. That means that force ideology wars have now just received a massive upgrade in their power level. You could, as a pacifist, completely slap an entire quadrant into the ground and make sure they never rise up as militarists ever again to threaten galactic peace.
At last, peace.
Now with the bug fixes, I'm only going to go through those which I think are the most important changes, or the changes we've wanted to see the most as a community. They have fixed the notification message for forced approval of a negotiated agreement due to the lack of influence, saying the proposal was declined, when of course in fact it wasn't actually declined. Progenitor hives can now lease fleets from mercenary enclaves without them getting a debuff. When an orbital ring is destroyed, you, the planet owner, gain ownership of the ruined ring immediately, if you are the owner of course. Now that is really useful because it means you can actually upgrade the darn thing and get a ring back, whereas previously there were some interesting bugs in that procedure. A mercenary fleet contract can now be terminated after a vassal has been integrated, meaning you're not on the hook for this contract that you really didn't want, crushing your economy. And that is a great change to have that's basically changing some of these issues we've been having. They have finally fixed the gender-specific ruler titles, which were broken as of patch 3.4. For example, if you wanted to name your rulers king or queen based on being male or female, you couldn't do that. There was just one title for all genders. Now, finally, we have separation and therefore optional equality between the genders. Admirals on mercenary fleets will no longer abandon their post when you finally lease a mercenary fleet. That's been a real issue dogging us with the mercenary enclaves for quite a while. It's good to hear they have finally fixed this, though it is a shame that that kind of bug actually found its way into release. You can no longer declare wars of vassalization against inward perfectionists. That's because they can't be vassals basically, and I think that is quite a nice change. It stops some of the weird and game-breaking ways you could bring inward perfectionists into federations, for instance, and other nonsense like that. Subjects that bounce between being a vassal or subsidiary and a protectorate should now correctly gain the protectorate bonuses, which I believe is 80% extra tech research speed to any piece of technology your overlord already has. And on top of that, the Khan will no longer count as a satrapy and will thus finally be able to invade planets again, making the Khan a lot scarier in the mid-game. This next one is a rather interesting one, and one that I actually covered in a video, and that is that patrons of mercenary enclaves can no longer recall fleets that they themselves are hiring. Yes, because I noticed that lovely little exploit and pointed out you can use it to convert directly influence into energy credits. At a maximum, I believe you could get something like 22,000 energy credits for just 100 or 200 influence, which in the mid-game might be quite useful if you're running with a complete glut of influence. So it is nice to see them changing these sorts of issues. If you don't use consumer goods and you conquer a planet with factories on it, they will now be removed, meaning you don't end up with some weird consumer good production even though you can't use the darn things. I think that's a really nice change. As a hive mind empire, I found a lot of times I end up with a little bit of consumer good production after a war, and it's always been a bit perplexing. It's also no longer possible for overlords to transfer more science than they generate to their subjects. Basically, as an overlord, you can end up setting up a condition where you give 60, 70, 80%, I can't even remember what the maximum is, I think it's 75%, but I could be wrong, of your science to your subject as a subsidy. And then if their science income is massive, that will then mean you can end up with negative research every month, which won't actually affect you. You don't go backwards with that, but it means as a unit, you and your subject together will actually be getting more science overall than the two are getting by themselves, which is of course completely broken. There have also been some changes to game stability and modding. Check those out in the dev diary itself if you want to read them. I'm not going to tell you about them specifically. Until then though, I am happy to announce that I will be co-hosting the ISL tournament, which is a Stellaris tournament this weekend with Comrade Truck. We'll be starting, I believe, at around 5 or 6 p.m. CEST, that's Central European Summertime, which on the East Coast of America should be somewhere in the region of 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning. So watch out for post announcements on that, because it will be a great live stream. We're going to be seeing what is going on in the new meta. At the moment, we're going to be watching a tournament live as it happens this weekend on Sunday, so keep your eyes peeled for that. There have been a lot of changes in today's patch notes, but something that has not changed is the galactic community and the resolutions therein. If you would like to know how I would rate the galactic community resolutions in a tier list, which ones I think are fantastic and which ones you should never ever pass, click the video on screen now.